Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we travel through space and time to learn about patching in Connectwise RMM. I will be your Scouterator for today's journey. Should you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me in the questions panel. Leading us on our journey today is David Allen. No, not David Allen Co. This is not Go. Over to you, my friend.
All right, thank you, Scotty. First, I just want to make sure because it was telling me that everyone was in a listen only mode. Can everybody see my screen and see the mouse moving around on here real quick?
I see
Or are
it.
we
Let's
still
do it.
good? All right. So yes, I am David Allen Notco, and we're going to be talking about patching in CW or Connectwise RMM today. Let's go ahead and take a look at today's agenda. So first up, we have, when it wants to work, patch approvals and exclusions. We're going to be looking at the patch approvals page and our exclusions page and take a brief look at what there is to approve and how to do it, and then looking at our exclusions and how to create an exclusion for maybe those one-offs that you have out there. After that, we're going to be creating a patching policy. This would be for a particular use case we're going to look at the next slide, and it will pertain to, say, patching for a specific client. After we create a policy, we need to create a package to deliver that policy to the endpoints. And then we'll start looking at patching overrides. We know that not all machines are created equal, so some may require some patches, while other ones you may want to stop those patches from being installed. So we'll look at some overrides that can take place at different levels of the product and how you can set those up. Then we'll take a really quick look at patch ticketing in Connectwise RMM and how that is set up. And then a little bit of light patch troubleshooting that you can do in RMM. So the question comes to mind is, why would we patch? Why do you want to patch? And I've heard someone say before that I have a great antivirus and good network security appliances. I feel secure. I don't feel that I have to patch. And that's fine. And that's great. You have good security and a good antivirus, but that doesn't fix vulnerabilities in the OS. You still have backdoors that could exist. If somebody does get in on your network, they can take advantage of that unpatched backdoor and get into your server and wreak havoc or get into whatever you have on your network. Another advantage to patching, of course, is improved system stability. You can have bugs fixed and remove flaws from your system. A good example is for any of the new Windows 11 machines out there, and you have maybe an application or piece of hardware that for some reason it causes the machine to crash or the application doesn't run. And a patch in Windows could very well fix that issue. For any of you that have been around for a very long time, I'm sure many of us, as myself, remember the time when, and this was going way back, when Windows 98 was first being launched, and Bill Gates was demonstrating plugging in a USB device, and it blue screened in front of the entire audience. Later on, of course, patching a system like that may fix an issue like that. But patching can also help with new client acquisition. So think that you've just acquired a new client, and part of the onboarding process and getting to know the client, you asked how was their previous TSP patching their devices. And the client knew that their previous TSP was kind of handling things in the background, but still they weren't quite sure or even if patching was happening on their systems. And coming into that kind of situation where, now I've got, say, 50 machines that I all of a sudden have to catch up on patching, that's going to be a nightmare. But with a plan in place on your RMM platform, you know patching can occur as quickly as possible, and you can get that client caught up. So first, let's take a look in patch approvals and exclusions in RMM. So we have our main page of our Connectwise RMM environment here, and we start on the computer screen, but we're going to navigate down advance too far to the OS patching patch approvals. And here we are on the patch approval screen. We're going to start by taking a look at how the screen is kind of laid out. So you notice that the patches are sorted by the status with new at the top here. And patches are collated under the KB number. So what I mean is that under the update name, we have our KB number here. And you can see that this one particular KB actually has two patches under it that we can choose to approve or block. And that KB number does match and collate under there. So if you're on this page and you're looking to approve some patches for your endpoints, you have to check each line and see if there's maybe one or multiple patches underneath that one KB number. That's how it kind of organizes it, so this list is not huge and overwhelming when you come in and take a look at it. Next, of course, is the classification column, and Connectwise RMM does have actually 8 classifications in the system. Now, we could get into what each classification is on Connectwise RMM and what it does, and I know there's a lot of text here and a lot to read, so some of you are probably maybe grabbing some screenshots right now. What you can also do is check out this QR code because there is a lot of information here. Give you a few seconds to grab that, and what that will do is take you right to the documentation page talking about patch classification in the Doc Center for Connectwise RMM. This will give you the same information. This information is taken from that page, but it'll go a little bit further into detail on the other parts of the classifications and OS patching in Connectwise RMM. So I'd highly recommend that you check out that page. Next is the date reviewed, or date released, excuse me. This is, of course, the date when the patch was released out in the wild, and this is when Connectwise RMM platform has received that patch, and it's sitting there waiting for your review, or maybe the NOC team's review. So then we're followed by the date reviewed. This is either the date that is specified if I were to come in and approve this patch. So for example, on this first one on the line, if I want to go ahead and approve that, I could just mark that approved. It will actually change to reviewed down here, and then it would show something like approved, like we see here at the bottom. That is going to show that the date that I have set this to approve, and then over in this column on the, or this box on the right, it's going to tell us who it was approved by and on what day that occurred on. And we do have our status column here that is organized by default going into this page with new at the top, so you can review those patches right away. Followed by in progress, this patch down here would have maybe a KB or two or a patch or two in that KB where one of them may have been approved, so that's why it could be marked in progress right now. The other one may not be set yet to approve or block. So I could click on that and then decide that if I want to approve or block the other patches associated with that KB number at the bottom. And then of course, the result of the review, where we can see at the bottom of this one is that this particular patch was blocked. For whatever reason, the patch was blocked. It does not, unfortunately, specify the reason as to why it was blocked. However, with the auditing that is in place, it will show the date and who blocked the patch to begin with. So if this patch was blocked, I know that I can go to one of my technicians or another user and see and ask them why this patch was blocked. So once we reviewed the patches here, as I mentioned before, is not all machines are created equal. You may need to exclude specific machines from certain patches. So that's where we would get into patch exclusions. The patch exclusions page is right underneath the patch approvals page. And here at this time, we didn't have any exclusions set up. So let's go ahead and add an exclusion into the system. When I click add exclusion, we're opted to give it a name and a description. And I've decided for excluding this particular KB. Don't take my word for what this KB is. I just picked a number that we had existing in the system and decided to exclude it just for this example. So when we have the information entered here, and I've entered just the number from the KB number in here, I can now come down here to my resources and I can decide that I want to exclude this KB from an entire site. Or if I want to exclude the KB from particular endpoints, I can still expand the site. And if I click resource name, I can still exclude the entire site. However, I can also come down here to Pizza Pete's, for example, and I can select just one endpoint to exclude this KB number from. When you do select individual machines like this, rather than selecting a whole site, notice that the sites do become grayed out and you can't select. If you are going to select maybe a couple of sites that you want to exclude, just check the box for the site. But if you're going to do something like this, where maybe I want to exclude an entire site or certain endpoints at multiple sites, you can click the resource name to exclude the entire site, or you can click the individual resources themselves. Once we have that information in there, I would go ahead and, of course, click Save. And we're brought back to the patch exclusions page where you can see the confirmation number and the information on the patch exclusion itself. This might be easier if I use that. So we do have a preview of what this patch exclusion is, who created it, the date it was created, and then a little bit more information, which is the name and the description that I put in for that patch exclusion. That patch exclusion is aimed at certain resources or endpoints in the system. And so when it comes to those endpoints trying to download those patches, it won't do that. And it's also, since it's excluded from there, should not count against the endpoint's compliance score as well. All right, so create a patching policy. Now that we've gone through and done our approvals and we've done our exclusions and we've decided what we want to patch into the system, now we're going to create a policy to distribute to our endpoints for that particular client to get them patched up as quickly as possible, but also to follow the approvals and exclusions that we have. So we're going to do that with a policy. So moving on from our patch exclusions page, we're going to go ahead and navigate down to settings. And we're going to open up the policies page. When we get to the policies page, we do have a set of policies over here on the left that are listed out, where we can get more information such as a policy name, the type of policy that it is, when it was last modified and who modified it. And on the right, we get a box or a preview of the settings in that policy. You can see we have our global desktop patching policy set up here. And this is the settings that we have applied to that policy. So for our new client acquisition, we're going to go ahead and add a policy. And our new client is going to be the Pizza Pete client that we have in this particular environment. So when I click new policy, this is our new policy screen here. And for the first part of category, there's nothing else really to set here but devices, so we don't really need to change or modify that at all, or we can't. And then under type, we actually have 4 different policy types. We have our communicator, which is going to control the communication settings, or in the taskbar for your endpoints, the little icon in the bottom right where the end user may have options of some communication between you and them, or where there's notification settings as well. We have our OS patching desktop and OS patching server policies, which we're going to take a look at in just a second. And then we have our remote access policy. So since we're talking about patching, the OS patching desktop and OS patching server policy. Of course, we'll also want to name the policy with a meaningful name. Just to mention real quick that is, since I'm creating this for Pizza Pete's, I'm going to call this the Pizza Pete desktop patching policy. Okay, so getting back to the desktop patching and server patching policies. Here's the 2 policies that we're concerned with since we're setting up patching for this particular client. The OS patching desktop policy settings are listed here, and you can see again, the 8 classifications that we looked at before. Under the OS desktop patching settings, we do have option to patch for Mac OS machines as well. And then we have our schedule setting. For the OS patching server settings, the only difference really is that we don't have a Mac setting here. So you can see the difference between the 2 policies there. So I've selected the OS patching desktop policy, and when I do that, notice it's not turned on right away. So of course that's going to need to be the first thing we need to do, is to enable or turn that policy on. After that, we're presented with the 8 classifications that we had before. And we have starting with the security updates. Now, the first drop down for security updates hold please. There we go. We have 3 options here of do not deploy, deploy all, or deploy only partner or NOC approved. The security updates in Connectwise RMM are reviewed by our NOC team, and they go through and decide that should these updates be approved or not, pertaining to whatever KB number those security updates are. If we select deploy all, it's just going to go ahead and deploy that security update right away, regardless of whether you've gone in and reviewed that patch or not. And then, of course, do not deploy, pretty self-explanatory, will not deploy security updates. The remaining 7 classifications have just a very slight difference in the drop-down selection that you can choose, where you only have deploy only partner approved, deploy all, or do not deploy. So the deploy only partner approved is going to wait for you to review your patch approvals that we looked at earlier and either set that patch to approve or block. I'll go ahead and set the rest of those in this particular policy. I don't have a best practice for setting these classifications, so use them at your own discretion or what fits best for your client. I'm not recommending any of these settings, so this is again just purely an example. After I've set those, I've come down to the bottom and we're going to look at the schedule settings that we can apply to this policy as well. With download and install, we do have immediately or at a scheduled time. If I select at a scheduled time, testing this out in this environment, I was able to go either every 1 day and set a time. By default, it's 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. Or I could take it up to 99 days and choose either 99 days, weeks, or months. And whether you choose one of those weeks or months, you can then decide what day you want to choose for that to occur on. For months, it would be in this example, the first Monday occurring every 99 months. That would be a terrible patching policy though. So for this one, we're going to do it every 1 day starting at 10 p.m. and have it cross over into 2 a.m. Now I'm having it do that because when you set up a time to download and install your patches for your endpoints, you can only give it a 4-hour window. You can't go less than that 4 hours. You can go beyond that 4 hours though, but the 4-hour window is the minimum setting for that. For install, it's the same process, but I'm going to have the install start off at 12 a.m. and have that run to 4 a.m. in this example. I'll have a little bit of overlap, so the machines or the endpoints can have at least 2 hours ahead of time to start downloading any patches or any updates that they need. And then starting at 12 a.m., I can go ahead and start the install. For deploy feature updates, we can have that either unscheduled or at a scheduled time as well. Unscheduled means that you will have to decide when you want to go ahead and install those. So the feature updates could download, but you'd have to pick a time to go ahead and fire that off. And then we have our reboot setting. We have a do not reboot. You could immediately reboot. So once a patch is downloaded and installed, then it needs to reboot, it will go ahead and reboot the system for you. Or you can also set the reboot at a scheduled time as well. I'm going to leave this at immediately, and since this client may have a couple of night shift workers there, so they could be working during this time, I'm going to make sure that I leave the notify setting on here at the bottom, so the end users will be aware of when their system is about to reboot for patching. Now, when it does pop up this notification on the screen, they do have the option to go ahead and delay that reboot for 1 hour, and then it will come up and let them know again that, hey, the system's going to reboot. I'll go ahead and select save now on this policy. And when we're back to the policy screen, I can see here at the top, here's my new Pizza Pete patching desktop policy, or desktop patching policy, I should say, with the preview information of the settings that I just set on here. If I see there is something wrong or that I didn't set something correctly, I can simply come up here to edit and make the changes to the policy that I need to make. So we have our policy set now, and you may think, great, I got my policy in place for the client. They'll start patching according to that policy. Not quite. We need a package to actually deliver that policy to those endpoints at the particular site. As it says, this is a package deal. If you have one, you have to have the other. Otherwise, that policy is not getting delivered to that client and they won't be patching anything. So creating a package is also quite simple in Connectwise RMM. From the policies page, we can go right above to packages. And similar to the policies page, we do get a preview of the packages that we already have in the system. You can see our global communicator package, which is just for that communicator policy. We do have a global desktop patching package as well, and some other packages that have been brought into the system. With one of the packages highlighted, we can see a preview of what that package is doing or what it applies to on the right. In this case, it's the communicator package, and it is the global communicator policy, and we know that the type is the communicator policy as well. So since we are going to be adding a package or patching settings for the particular client, Pizza Pete, we're actually going to be doing an override, which we'll look a little bit further into overrides later on. So I'm going to add a package to basically override that default global patching policy. So when I click the add to package, I'm on the new package page. Of course, we'll give it a meaningful name. And since this is just going to be for a particular site, we don't want to check this set as default package. If we do that, that's going to take over, say, as the new global policy and actually distribute out to all the endpoints. So we don't want to do that. Once I have that named, I'm going to go ahead and expand out the available policies here. And you can see the policy that we created before, the P2P desktop patching policy. You can click and drag that over to the left. And the great thing about a package is that we can actually deliver multiple policies here. But you can only deliver one policy type per package. So we have the OS patching desktop policy here, for example. If I grab another one of these patching desktop policies and drag it over, it's actually going to replace the P2P desktop patching policy. I can't have two of those same policies in there because they will conflict with each other. I can decide that I'm going to grab a communicator policy. We have a P2P HQ communicator policy. I could throw this in here as well. Or I could throw OS patching server policy in here and a remote access policy. So whatever you want to do with the package, if we're going to be configuring this for servers and workstations at a particular client, you can put those two policy types in there and take care of everything all in one package. With that, I'll hit save and I'm brought back to the packages page. And we can see the new package now that is listed at the top. With the package highlighted, we do get a preview again over here on the right showing the P2P desktop patching policy and the OS patching desktop policy, or the OS patching desktop policy that is assigned to that policy we created. Now, as I mentioned before, the default policy is what is set to all of the endpoints basically right out of the box when they first get installed on Connectwise RMM. So what we need to do is we need to apply this at a site. So we'll go ahead and click onto the Sites tab. And we have our sites listed out here that we have in our RMM platform. Now from here, we can select one, or you can even select multiple sites as well. So if you decide that this package is great, I have a really solid patching policy in it for my servers and workstations, I have a good communicator policy in it, I want to assign this to actually several sites. You can check these boxes here and then click Assign Package and assign that same package to all those sites. In this case, we're just assigning to Pizza Pete's, for example, so I'm going to go ahead and select that and then click the Assign Package button. When I click that, we get the Assign Packages to Site window appearing here. So I'll select the Pizza Pete Desktop Patching and click Assign. After you do that, you do get the confirmation that it was assigned successfully. So now the Pizza Pete endpoints, I know, are going to receive that patching policy in particular to their, or set up for their situation where that client wasn't really sure if the TSP was patching their systems or not. So the machines now will patch according to my schedule every day, starting at 10 p.m., running to 4 a.m. for downloading, installing, and rebooting. And I know that those systems will get patched up starting on the overnight process. So as I mentioned, we were going to be looking at patching overrides. And patching overrides actually kind of depends on the packages. So the packages are kind of listed out in a hierarchy in Connectwise RMM. The highest one here is, of course, our factory settings. Those are settings that are set up out of the box from Connectwise. This level exists above the partner hierarchy, meaning that you can't go in and change the factory settings that is set up in Connectwise RMM. You can override them though and make your own changes by doing a default package. This is the highest level of the partner hierarchy that you can see. So any value that you set here is defined and it is inherited by all these lower levels if we don't set up anything below here. So thinking back to that global desktop patching policy, that was our default policy, or a default package rather. That default package is distributed to all the sites, all the endpoints, unless I were to specify a site package. The site package is what's going to override that default package because that's going to have more precedence the further we go down this pyramid here. So after site is policy group. Policy group allows you to actually, instead of selecting just a site and selecting all the machines at the site, you can actually select multiple one-off endpoints, for example. So if I have 3 clients and one client has 2 servers, another client has 5 workstations, and another client has 4 machines, that I want to change something in the patching policy and deliver a different package to them, I can create a policy group that will then search out, grab those machines, put them into the policy group, and then I can apply that particular patching policy to those machines out of those different sites. So the rest of the machines at those sites can still patch under the normal default package or the site package, and they won't be following the policy group that I set up for those certain one-off machines. If we're going to do an override on a singular machine, of course, followed by that last is the device override. That's the lowest level of the hierarchy, and any value set here is only defined at the device. There's nothing else that can be inherited from that level. So taking a further look into this and where they are in the product, we have our global desktop patching policy here, and this one is defined as default. If you remember back to when we made the Pizza Pete desktop patching policy that we see here at the bottom, and on the new screen, it didn't have, or we had the default checkbox and we left that unchecked because we're not going to have that take over for this policy. So this policy is set up with our settings that we have configured, and we've made it the default policy. The next one under that is sites, of course, and we've already been through assigning that site to the Pizza Pete client. So then followed by that, of course, is the policy groups. This is the next level down in that package hierarchy. When we go to the policy groups tab, we have the option to add a group here, and we have some that are somewhat set, but we need to go in and configure that. So I'm going to select the OS Patching Desktop and create a policy group for OS Patching Desktop. When I click Add Group, I'm presented with a new policy group screen. And for this particular policy group, I'm going to decide that it's going to be an override of no feature updates, meaning I'm not going to have RMM put out feature updates. That's something that I'm going to handle on my own for maybe these particular machines I'm going to add into the policy group. Once I have that set here on the summary, I'm going to go ahead and click Assign. And if you remember back to when we were looking at the policies, we did have more than 4. We're only showing 4 here because this is only desktop patching policies, since this is only a desktop patching policy group. So I did create a policy earlier called No Feature Updates policy, so I'll select that and click Assign. And now that I have that assigned here, we get to do the devices criteria. And this is where we are selecting out our endpoints to be added to this policy group. So you can see right here, we have devices meeting criteria is not applicable at the moment because we have no criteria listed out. So if I go ahead and click add criteria, and it opens up a block right here. Now, for the type of criteria we want to find, I could start typing in here and see what selections come up. What I can also do is hit this icon right here, and it's actually going to list out the different criteria that I want to look for. If I want to search this list, you can simply do that up here. This list is actually very long and very big, so I'm not going to list out all of them here. It would take pages and pages for me to list them all out. So for this one, I want to look for a particular OS version. So I just typed in OS, found the criteria that I want to search for, and I clicked add criteria here. And now I'm back to where the OS and I'm looking for contains any of, and then in this drop down, I chose Microsoft Windows 10 Pro. That was an option I had available. Once I selected that, it shows me that now I have devices meeting that criteria. If I want to view those devices, I can click on the number 4, and I get a list of those devices listed out here of what's meeting that criteria. Now you can even narrow this down even further. So if you are a partner with, say, 10,000 endpoints and you want to narrow this down to a few hundred, you can start adding criteria to start narrowing down this search. When I click the add criteria button, it will come up with an and statement. So this could be OS and maybe I could put a version number in there, or maybe I could have it look for a particular piece of hardware for those systems. When I click on and, I also have the option to change it to an or statement as well. And this is all included within, if you can see this here, this gray block that is here. If I hit add outer block, it's actually going to add another block of criteria that I can start adding in. And that one defaults to or, but I can also hit the drop down and change that to and as well. The way I would probably do it though is that if I'm adding criteria, I would probably have my ands up here and then maybe have an or down here if it is looking for something else. This, whatever you define for this criteria is completely up to you. I'm just showing the different examples that we can put in here for the policy group. So then finally, we have the patching override that can occur at the device level here. So we're going to look at the Edgy Workstation 3 for Pizza Pete's. And if I click on the device name here, I'm now on the device page. Now I'm going to pose a question to everybody here so you can reply back. I know our replies usually come back in the questions pod, but looking on this page, where would I go to apply a patching override, would you think? What tab up here at the top would I use? Does anyone have an idea? Okay, I'm seeing some answers here. All right, we're getting some good answers. So if you said OS patching, I'm sorry, but that's wrong. It's actually settings. One of you guys got that on here. So it's sort of a tricky question here, but you would actually be going to the settings tab to kind of do a patching override or an override of a policy on a particular endpoint. So when I click into the settings tab, we have our devices listed here. We're just looking at one particular device, so I'm going to expand that. And then you can actually see the different policy types that are applied to this endpoint. So the one, of course, we're going to look at is the OS patching desktop policy, and you can see that's applied by the site. That is going back to the Pete-to-Pete desktop patching package that we configured at a site level. So that is telling us where it is coming from. And when I click on that, we get the OS patching desktop settings listed out here. Again, we know what policy it's coming from, and we know what package it's coming from as well. That's all listed out here. If I want to do an override and actually change something on here, I will click Edit. And we have all the settings listed out just like we did when we were making the policy earlier in the presentation. So for this particular agent, or endpoint, I should say, the feature updates, I want to decide that I'm going to change that to do not deploy. Now that I have that setting in here, I'm going to click Save. And when you do make a change like that, it is now denoted with a red bar here and on the devices section as well, showing that there is a change on this particular endpoint. This policy has been overridden. So if anyone were to come in and take a look at this endpoint and go to the settings section, they would see, okay, someone's done an override here. And they could take a look at this particular override and it'll actually show what's been overridden right here. So we have our policy, our package, we've looked at our overrides. So the next thing, of course, is patch ticketing. When we want to know what's going on with our systems, we're going to use patch ticketing in Connectwise RMM. All right. So back in our devices page for RMM, we're going to expand out alert management. And we're going to go to IntelliMon alerts. Under IntelliMon alerts, and at the time of this presentation, we had 1,125 different IntelliMon alerts on here. And you may think that's great, but you're going to have to scroll through a big list to find those patching IntelliMon alerts. Or do you? Up here in the search, I can actually filter out and look for the related IntelliMon alerts for patching. I can click the filters button here and get some options to filter out some of these alerts. Or in this case, I can simply type in the word patch and it filtered to 14 different related IntelliMon alerts related to the word patch or patch management. We do have this one under the family that SharePoint has snuck in here because again, it has the word patch in it, but all the other ones are patch management related IntelliMon alerts. How you search for certain monitoring in the system is up to you. I would recommend either using the search here and using the filter. You can use both of them together to kind of narrow down that search, look for the particular IntelliMon alert. But you can see we have ones that are looking for any type of issues, assessment failures, installation failures, and so on. Now there is a section up here, if you notice at the top, that is actually called Preview Alerts. Preview Alerts is kind of like a beta view of what could be coming soon. So you can check out this section as well. I do like to look in here from time to time to kind of see what's coming for Connectwise RMM. And we can see that we just have one IntelliMon alert related to OS patching, which is the OS patching out of support status. Now, I asked our product management what this meant exactly, and he said it was for when a system has basically reached end of life and they're no longer going to be receiving patches in or from Microsoft, for example. So end of life product, if you have an old product on there, I wouldn't suggest you do, but if you do, then that IntelliMon alert will let you know. Now you want to be careful in activating these. If you can go ahead and select this and enable it and actually have it active on your system. If it's in preview like this and it's not enabled, it's not going to be doing anything on your system, but your mileage may vary with any preview alerts that you may activate, not pertaining to just patching, but any preview alerts. So if you enable an update, you could have one of several things happen. You could have it work fine and it does its intended purpose. It could work too well and become incredibly noisy on your system, or it could do where it just doesn't work at all and doesn't detect anything. So your mileage may vary with these. I would suggest maybe enabling it, kind of testing it out, seeing if it does what you need to do if you really want to use it. If you don't and you just want to leave it alone in preview alerts, that's perfectly fine too, because it is going through testing and it is being vetted by our team before it is gone ahead and switched over to the alert section where it will work on your system. By selecting that, we're brought to a slightly different page. We still have our name and friendly name listed here, the device type and site name, but then we start to have some different information over here. We have our compliance score listed out. You can see this one at the top, it's offline, but it's at 66%. We also have the date and time of when the last patch assessment was run on that system. In this case, it was way back in February. Okay, I'm getting a notice here that audio was lost. Can everybody hear me now, or have we still lost audio?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thanks. All right. Okay. So with this, we have the last assessed, pretty self-explanatory, the last date and time that the patch assessment was run on the system. So we're going to take a look at, since we're still working with Pizza Pete's, we're going to look at the Edgy Workstation 3 machine down here at the bottom. When I click that machine or select it, I've come up here to run, and we have some patching tasks that we can run here against this machine. We can deploy missing OS patches. So this one we see is 75% compliant. And this again is going back to the client. Maybe they're not up to date on all their patches. Maybe they need to get up to date, so I have to patch them right away. I could deploy missing OS patches by policy, so that's still going to follow the policy that we specified, but I could choose to go ahead and deploy those patches right away or schedule them out, which we'll see in just a second. The one I want to call out in particular is run the OS patching assessment. By running the OS patching assessment, this is going to do a couple things. When we run that, it is going to generate a patch assessment failure ticket in the system. So this is going to flag it and say, hey, patch assessment failed. I would be running this to say if I just patched the system, or maybe I just deployed the missing updates to the system, and the patch assessment isn't due to run for maybe another hour or two. So I want to go ahead and run the patch assessment now to get this compliance score back up and get more accurate information into my RMM system. So by selecting one of these tasks here, come on, there we go. We have our running OS patch assessment or run OS patch assessment window open. And we do have different schedules that we can set here. We can run that right now, of course. We can run later, so we can decide a start time and or start date and time that we want to run this. And we have the option of either doing local machine time or set it to a particular time zone to run. Can run reoccurringly, which is similar to the run later with scheduling it out. but we have a repeat option down here where we can do it hourly, monthly, weekly, however we want to do it, how often to repeat that, and the runtime. And we can decide that we either want to end it on a particular date and time, or we never want to end it and have it run indefinitely or repeat indefinitely. We can also run on a trigger. So if we know that these updates are going to be installing on the system, and the system is going to reboot, I could come here to select a trigger, and I could have it run on, say, first check-in, just for example. Endpoint checks in, starting at this time and day, the patch assessment will then run, and then it will go ahead and update the information in RMM. We can also go into the individual endpoint and do a little bit further patch troubleshooting as well. If I open up the Edge Workstation 3 under Pizza Pete's, and now if I go to the OS Patching tab, this is where we can do further troubleshooting. We also get a summary as to what's going on with this system. Why is this at 75%? Well, we're missing a couple of patches here, so this is at 75%. We do get a summary of the operating system that is on this endpoint. We get last assessed and our last restart that has happened on the system. Down here at the bottom, we can see the 2 missing patches that we have on the system and some more detailed information on the right about what this patch contains, what it pertains to. So with that information in mind, I can now do some quick patch actions at the top. I can either reboot the machine. Maybe the patches are installed, they're just needing a reboot, so I can go ahead and do that. I can run the OS patch assessment, and again, just like we did on the devices page, if I rerun the OS patch assessment, it is still going to cause that failure notification, but that's letting you know that the assessment's run. And if we refresh the information, we can come back and see more up-to-date information for the OS patch assessment. Or we can deploy these missing OS patches. These 2 patches at the bottom, I see they're missing. I want to get this machine updated right away to get it compliant. I'm going to go ahead and deploy those OS missing patches on the system. Okay, and with that, we have our questions and answers. I know this is kind of a longer one. We have about 8 or so minutes left for questions, or maybe 6 or so minutes, I should say, left for questions. So Scotty, do we have anything out there?
We've got a few. I'll answer a couple right off the bat myself. One of them here was about, is it possible to test patches for individual client environments on specific machines similar to test pilot production flags for Automate agents? Well, you really don't need to do that with patching in RMM because we have the NOC. The NOC does testing of patches before they approve them. So one of the things you saw is that a patch can be listed as approved by the NOC or blocked by the NOC, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're testing patches for you before they make any determination on any of them. So really, you don't need to do any additional testing since we've got the NOC testing patches before they approve them on your behalf. We have another question here that was, does this disable the Windows patching? And the answer is no. So when you're patching with RMM, end users are still going to be able to go into their device and go into Windows patching themselves. At this time, that does not interfere with that functionality at all.
Right. So to add to that, if you are, say, remoted into the endpoint and you open up Windows updates, you can still run the patching from there as well. Scotty, I do want to add to that first question that you had. I kind of like to answer that yes and no as far as testing patches, and here's why. So if you remember back to setting up the patching policies where you can schedule it out, you could schedule your global desktop patching policy for a certain day of the week at a certain time. Now, if you wanted to have say a sandbox environment or a particular client where you want to vet those patches yourself, maybe you don't have that setting in the policy set to knock approval and it's waiting for your approval. Or you just have it set to deploy all, so it's just going to deploy everything. You can set a particular client, say maybe a few days or even a week ahead of time of your global desktop patching policy and have that particular site patch ahead of time, and then you can monitor it for a week. And if you notice that there is any patches that cause a problem or an issue at that particular client, you can then go into your patch approval screen and block that patch before the global desktop policy grabs it and distributes it out to the rest of your endpoints. So you can do it in that respect if you manipulate the scheduling where your global or your default desktop patching policy is, say, maybe a few days or a week behind that site policy that you have set up for a particular site.
All right, I believe this was answered in the presentation. The question was, can we set to auto approve? Certainly within a policy, you have the ability to say deploy all on some of those patch types, right, Natko?
That is correct.
Another question here is from a best practice perspective and ease of management. Do you recommend we keep the number of patching policies minimal, or should we be creating a patch policy per client? I say that that's really up to how much work you want to do. I would be more inclined, if I were in your shoes, to try to limit how many patch policies I create, and therefore I wouldn't offer too many to my clients when I onboard them. That makes it easier for me to manage. Of course, you certainly could create one per policy per client, but that's just a lot of additional management on your end when you try to maintain those policies going forward.
Right. What you could do in that respect is you could keep the global desktop patching policy and the default package assigned to all your endpoints. If you acquire a new client, in this case where we need to get them patched right away, so you're going to have it maybe patching every night at a set time, you could assign a new policy and package and assign it to that particular site. Once that particular site is caught up, you can actually go back in and remove that assignment, and the global policies will actually take back over, or the default policy and package will take back over, and those endpoints will patch normally with the rest of your systems. So if you want to do something like that, you could have maybe a temporary package set up that does constant patching just to get them caught up, and then you could unassign that package afterwards. So that would be how maybe I would approach something like that. But otherwise, I would also definitely keep it at a minimum, because that's a lot less work you have to do. If you're setting it up on a site per site basis, that's a lot more going in and configuring that you have to set up for each and every client. And I don't know about you, but if I get 200 clients in, I don't want to have to go do that 200 times.
We had another question here about how long does it take for NOC to approve an update? That has recently changed, or a little while ago changed. It used to be 14 days and now it's 7. So patches get approved within 7 days after they get after they're detected by the NOC.
All right, is there any other questions? Now's the time. Or if you think of a question later, you can certainly email education@connectwise.com, and one of us bros will be happy to answer the question for you. All right, no more questions, Scotty?
Yes, sir, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you everybody for attending today. It was great seeing all of you show up here and good amount of questions that we had sent to our Scoderator. So again, if you need anything else, education@connectwise.com. And on a quick note, if you want to share this with any of your colleagues later on, this is recorded and this is posted out to the university, so it will be available later on. Thank you everyone and have a fantastic day.
How are you?